Joan Jegasthi, I can't even pronounce my last name, that's all right. I'm currently the president of CFR, Community of Former Refugees. We are a community of former refugees who've been granted protection visas in Australia, and we're now immensely proud to call this country our home. As a community of people who have experienced first-hand generosity and acceptance shown to us by so many of you, we feel it's our responsibility to speak up about the kindness we've been shown after escaping the horrors of our past. We also take it upon ourselves to speak for refugees who are currently unable to speak for themselves so that they, just like we, may also be granted freedom. In doing this, there are three main messages we'd like to speak about today. The first is the issue which has been predominant in the media in the last few months about the record number of asylum seekers arriving on Australian shores by boat. We'd like to help the Australian public understand that asylum seekers are trying to escape serious, life-threatening situations just as we did, and this country can help them just as they've helped us. The second issue we want to address is the common misconception that many asylum seekers arrive in Australia illegally and bring with them criminal characteristics. Asylum seekers are not criminals. They're not trying to take over jobs, nor are they trying to benefit from government aid. They're simply trying to obtain a better life and hopefully contribute to the growth of another country through what they have to offer. The third message we wish to instill today is the need for an education program to be implemented in Australian schools and universities. It's imperative that young adults are made aware of the turmoil that asylum seekers face and the benefits that can come from embracing multiculturalism. To be given the chance to speak to you all today and to set the record straight on some of these issues is a huge honour. The loss of life on dangerous maritime voyages in search of Australia's protection has been increasing to a level which is simply unacceptable. It is for this reason that we stand here today to encourage the Australian public to embrace refugees into your lives and your hearts to help someone create a life worth living. To start on a positive note, let us first express our relation for the recommendation put forward in the report of the expert panel on asylum seekers released on the 13th of August 2012. The recommendation that the humanitarian program be immediately increased to 20,000 places per annum is one which we support wholeheartedly. This is a vital step in our ongoing mission to support the settlement of asylum seekers and welcome them into the society we're now a part of. I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you my own experience as a former refugee. I, just like everyone in this community, was once a refugee seeking asylum in Australia. I fled Sri Lanka more than 20 years ago after facing violence and intimidation as part of the Tamil ethnic group. After being accepted as a refugee by the United Nations, I came to this country via plane through the official resettlement program and was originally granted a protection visa. I've recently become an Australian citizen and this is a title I'm proud to hold. While I'm quite settled now, I will never forget the fear and uncertainty that drove me to apply for protection in Australia. I continue to dedicate most of my life to helping asylum seekers who, unlike myself, came by sea, risking their lives to escape the trouble in their country by any means possible. They faced exactly the same fears I did. Would I ever be reunited with my family? Was it even a possibility to be accepted into a country where I wasn't punished for my beliefs? I'm now a minister with the Uniting Church and always give as much support as I can to people who are waiting and worrying in process centres. Over the years, I've assisted hundreds of asylum seekers and refugees and I'm always moved by their reactions when Australia offers them a second chance. On the topic of second chances, I'd now like to address the issue of record numbers of asylum seekers arriving on Australian shores. Let us start by stating the facts. The number of irregular maritime arrivals who have arrived in Australia in the first 7 months of 2012 stands at 7,120, exceeding the number who arrived in 2011, which was 4,733. Due to the rise in numbers, the loss of life on dangerous maritime voyages in search of Australia's protection has been increasing. We believe that rather than denying asylum seekers the right to take terrible risks, there is a responsibility to create opportunities that would enable their claims to be processed more fairly and effectively and in ways that make those risks unnecessary. That is not to say that there are quick and simple solutions to the policy dilemmas that the humanitarian challenge of the seeking asylum creates. Rather, in addressing these dilemmas and meeting those challenges, we believe that Australian policy can and should be hard-headed but not hard-hearted. Practicality and fairness should take precedence over theory and inertia, and that the perfect should not be allowed to become the enemy of the good. Before we delve deeper into the next point, I'd like to provide you with definitions explaining what constitutes the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee. An asylum seeker is someone who has fled their country of origin due to a well-founded fear of persecution and has applied for protection in another country. A refugee has sought protection in another country and has been successful in their application. In terms of legalities, it has never been illegal in Australia to arrive on shore without a visa seeking asylum. It is, in fact, one of the rights in the UN's Declarations on Refugee for which Australia is a signatory. Both people are asylum seekers. Refugees are asylum seekers who have been granted visas. None of them, however, are illegal immigrants. The preconception of asylum seekers having violent and criminal characteristics is simply untrue. In any society, there are people who are involved in war crimes or have negative character issues. However, there are processes built into the Refugees Convention and Australia's domestic laws to ensure that no harm comes to Australian residents. In fact, the onshore protection program for refugees who are in Australia both legally and illegally requires that applicants must meet health and character requirements to be granted a protection visa. In recent years, there has also been a series of emails widely circulated throughout Australia claiming to describe higher social security entitlements for refugees compared with those other Australian residents. There is no truth to that claim. Refugees are not entitled to higher benefits than other social security recipients. Refugees have the same entitlements. They do not receive special refugee payments or special rates of payment. While their status is being processed, and if they meet certain criteria, they can be eligible for some financial support from the Asylum Seeker Assistance Scheme. However, this is administered through the Red Cross. If and when an asylum seeker is granted permanent residency in Australia, they become entitled to the same schooling, health and Centrelink benefits just as any Australian citizen, the same as me and the same as you. As for risk to employment, in Australia, refugees make up approximately 0.059% of the overall population. From this, an even smaller percentage makes up the number of adult refugees who seek employment. This tiny number of refugees seeking work cannot truly impact the current Australian employment rate that drastically. Refugees are after a fair go. They want work and they want to contribute positively to the Australian society. Finally, we wish to reiterate the need for an education program to be implemented in Australian schools and universities. It's imperative that young adults are made aware of the turmoil asylum seekers endure and the benefits that can come from embracing multiculturalism. As former refugees who have been lucky enough to be granted protection visas, we have the opportunity to educate the Australian public about the chaos that asylum seekers face when attempting to escape the suffering of their previous lives and rebuild new homes for themselves and their families. We are prime examples of how our multicultural knowledge can benefit the Australian community in new ways. We want to show that on unstable and unauthorised boats are valuable citizens who will improve our nation and the lives of ourselves and our children. Imagine a young Iranian entrepreneur who will create hundreds of jobs for Australian citizens, or a Sri Lankan researcher who can use the resources of Australia to invent a cure for cancer. After delivering these facts to you, I ask you to take a step back and just to look at the bigger picture. It's hard for you to imagine a different life when Australia has been home to you your entire existence. You have experienced the freedom, peace and wonders of this land. You have been gifted with your government and the fixed laws of fair human rights. You share an abundance of love and respect for your neighbours. However, as young Australians, or some young Australians, are just not aware of how extremely blessed they are to have been given the life they lead, they're taking their country for granted. Australians need to learn that there is another reality, a reality where the world is bigger than just them, and a reality they wouldn't want to believe. The horrific reality is that human beings, innocent human beings, are suffering. These human beings could have been your neighbours. Imagine if it was your son who experienced war at the age of 8. Imagine if it was your mother who was forced to abandon your family in fear of her life. Imagine if you could never see any member of your family ever again. This is a reality for thousands of asylum seekers that arrive in Australia each year, and can you blame them? Ask yourself, what would you do if your life was on the line? Would you give up, or would you fight to make a change? The ones you call asylum seekers are strong-willed and don't want to give up. They don't want to accept the hand that fate has dealt them, but to fight for a better life, a new beginning where they may have a second chance to offer Australia their gifts and escape their traumatic past.